Islamophobia, particularly in its relationship with nationalism, has visible precedents in the West. In the 1980s and 1990s, racist attacks against refugees and foreigners intensified. In the late 1990s and by 9/11, Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism spread out across the world. Since that time, Islamophobic discourses has achieved a hegemonic position in the Western Hemisphere. For many years now, politicians, especially on the far right, have made use of Islamophobia in their election campaigns. These include the Front National in France and Freedom Party in Austria, Wallons Belong in Belgium, the Sweden Democrats in Sweden, and the recent US elections. The current refugees crisis thus has become a crucial moment for the European Union. Generally, the Eastern and Southeastern European countries are the first stages for refugees coming from Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, and Iraq, while a majority of them try to continue on to Germany. Hence, the border countries of the European Union are of special interest in terms of their dealings with the issue. It is especially noteworthy that East European countries are on average home to a much smaller number of Muslims than the Western European countries. France is home to an estimated 10% of Muslims. Austria, Belgium, Germany, and Switzerland host about 6%. In contrast, with the exception of few countries with a native Muslim community like Bulgaria and Greece, Eastern European country member states have a small number of Muslims, often even less than 1%. But Islamophobia has become a central issue in the course of refugee debate. In our next step, politicians in the United States as well as in many European countries start connecting the issue of terrorism to the refugees issue. Officials of the United States Homeland Security Committee continue to admit concerns over Syrian refugees' placement efforts, fearing terrorists could enter the United States. The most rigorous screening is applied to detect possible terrorists among Syrian refugees. A passing view at the most prominent Islamophobic web pages provides insight into the prevailing anti-Muslim racist worldview that exists in the midst of refugees debate. To take one example, right-wing political activist Pamela Geller tells us about a video from Hungary where she identifies Muslim refugees flooding Europe, shouting Allahu Akbar, which she interprets as a declaration of war against the West. She calls the refugees hostile invaders who are not in any real or dire need and urges the media to blame migrants for their own nations while expressing fear that the welfare states cannot finance half the planet. For Geller, we are not speaking about real refugees, but rather of Muslims from the jihad's hotspots of Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, who compromise an immigration jihad. Other Islamophobic web pages call it terrorism hijrah. In Geller's view, mainstream media wants us to believe that if you disagree with letting all these people into your country, you are a heartless, hateful, racist bigot. But a passing view of the European refugees debate with all the Islamophobic voices by established politicians reveals that these Islamophobic views have become quite mainstream now. Another Islamophobic web page argues that immigrating Muslims men plan to marry more than one woman and then take advantage of the social welfare system. Once in Germany, the women request social welfare benefits, including the cost of a separate home for themselves and for their children, on the claim of being a single parent with children. While the European Union as a whole does not seem to be ready to deal with the biggest so-called refugee crisis since World War II, given that there is no coordinated European Union effort for dealing with this issue, the respective nation states are left on their own. In many of these nation states, not only high-ranking politicians from nationalist and right-wing political parties and the opposition, but also in the conservative Christian camp and indeed many in power, reproduce Islamophobic discourses strategies. It is important to clearly state that many of the politicians who are spreading this kind of Islamophobic thoughts are being criticized by the international organizations and by the local NGOs.